Hello and welcome to our NPT community class on the Wunda chair. Now today what we're going to be doing is running through the fundamental exercises that we learn at National Pilates training and looking at how they interrelate to a lot of that repertoire throughout the Wunda chair, but specifically today, the intro to basic repertoire. So today it won't look like a fully planned out class because we're going to start with running through the fundamental exercises. Then we're going to go into the Wunda chair and show how those fundamental exercises relate to those exercises and how they're a lot of those principles are directly transferable across to the repertoire of the Wunda chair. So at some points I will bring us back to the mat and almost revisit potentially a fundamental exercise and then go back to the Wunda chair for us to explore how that sort of comes back in and works with that. Okay. So we'll start by laying down onto our backs, setting up into our supine position or our starting position. Okay. And I just want you to start off by finding what is your body shape at this current point in time. So start to listen into your body. Is it feeling like it's tight when you lay down on the ground in certain areas, or do you feel like you sort of really melt into the mat and flatten out into it? And just sort of see where your characteristics of your body are now, because you'll need to adjust as you work through your exercises to sort of, acknowledge where you are and how you're feeling. As you're here, I want you to start finding your foot posture. So the pressure into the ball of the big toe, the little toe, and the heel. And then also asking for a spread and length through the toes so you can find that archway of the foot. And then linking that all the way up the legs to the pelvis and finding that weight into the pelvis, but also length. It almost feels like it's directly connected to the back of the feet. From there, when you find your length, do you notice that you have a light little arch or that lordosis of the lumbar? And then the weight of the ribs. Following up to the weight of the head. And what's bridging that thoracic in your head is the neck. And it's having a very similar light lordosis to the lumbar. From there, we're just going to start with our diaphragmatic breathing. Breathing in. Feeling the belly expand, and the rib cage is reciprocal of that. And then as you breathe out, let that structure of the trunk just come back to its normality of where we set up for our printing positioning. Breathing in again. Find the expansion of the belly. Expansion of the rib cage must be reciprocal too for that diaphragm to move. And then breathing out and bringing it back. Just give me 3 more of these. Two more. Last one. Good, and as we breathe out now, we want to find that we're not breathing down to the belly so much, but out to the backs and sides of the ribs. for our posterior lateral breathing, or what people nickname the Pilates breathing, or our lateral breathing. And as you do that, be okay that the rib cage expands still. Be okay that there might be a little bit of action of the diaphragm down the bottom here of the ribs, because for you to expand your ribs, your diaphragm does have to still slightly lower. Good, last breath here. From here, you're going to work into our imprints. All we're doing is using that breath out, letting the pelvis roll backwards, and finding the spine just absorbs that roll of the pelvis, which means that yes, the spine does imprint into the mat, but it's a reaction from the pelvic movement and the pelvic control. And then we're breathing in to bring it back. And so be okay that as you breathe and the spine absorbs the motion of the pelvis, that the ribs are also pliable to absorbing. Hence the work around that lateral breathing that we wanted to do at the start. So there is movement at the structure for it to be able to absorb the change of movement and load from neighbouring structures, which makes us look dead still. Good. On the next one, we're going to roll up into a pelvic curl. Still honour the imprint as you breathe out to roll, and then start to peel the pelvis and the spine up and off the ground. As you do so, find that length out through the legs. Do your knees have a relationship of moving over the feet as you roll up? And then able to maintain that as you roll back down. So you're getting the responsibility back and around those hamstrings for the loading properties. Good. As we go again, we're breathing out to find the roll up. Keep concentrating on your peel like you do. And then the secondary focus being that length of the femurs or the knees over the toes or the feet. Good, we're just going to do one more. Good, and then from there we're going to bring our arms out in front of us, and we're going to reach through the arms, and we want to reach through those arms to find that connection back at the trunk as we peel ourselves off into our chest lifts. So don't just let the arms passively hang, find a reach through them, because this is going to relate to our motions like the washerwoman later on. And so when we work through our arms here, they should be a feedback tool or an assist to come up into our chest lift and find that flexion of the trunk. As opposed to just a dead weight for leverage. So you want to find that reach. So breathing out, find your reach. Breathe in at the top, and then breathe out to come back down. We're only going to do one or two more. Good. From there, we just place the handstand by our sides. Going into those single leg lifts. As you breathe out, still continue to find that sort of printing position that you had, that longest version of you. You want to float one leg up to that tabletop positioning via the hip. Breathe in at the top, and then just breathe out and float it back down. And then we'll alternate sides. And as you work through this, you want to keep coming back and resetting that foot posture. So not only the 3 points of pressure, but that toe spread too, to find full activity at the foot. As we breathe out to bring the next leg up, finding that impact is at the hip itself and not you trying to take your whole pelvic structure back. Because when we do work into these right now, this is essentially what our leg and foot work's about on the Wunda chair. Finding that deep crease and separation. Finding that lumbo-pelvic control between the stability of the lumbar and the pelvis and the motion of the legs. And also with that footwork that we are practicing here on the ground, doesn't that just relate back into our relationship with the pedal when we do our footwork in a second? Good. If you're okay with having one leg up, bring the other leg up to meet it. Good. Arms are going to come out to our 45-degree angle and heels are at least together as we breathe in for our spine twists. And so seeing how we can work, once again, rotational control in through our trunk while the pelvis is in flexion. Which is the same as practicing anti-rotation when we go into our single leg and footwork. So we're not getting twisted around. And what I mean by anti-rotation, even though we're rotating over here, we're controlling it, so we're not letting ourselves plummet. And so there is still, even though we are rotating, there is a control to stop ourselves from losing control and rotating out of our capacity to control it. Good, last one. Good, the feet will come down. Find that active feet again. Find the length out through your pelvis. Arms are going to come up for our hulas. From here, I'm going to get you to breathe out. Folding up into that chest lift. Use your arms as that feedback tool again. Once we're there, we then breathe out to continue to flex as we twist. So it then looks like an oblique or a diagonal motion. Once again, using this to be able to practice our work through our stability. Our oblique control. And also that anti-rotation again. So instead of really folding over to the side like such. Good. Last one each side. And lowering that back down. Good. From here, I'm going to get you to just briefly come up onto all fours. Just for our quadruped work. Because this is also another one that starts to get us ready for that leg and footwork. So if we have a look at our quadruped printing here, you're looking out through the length of the head and the length of the pelvis. And if it was a passive engagement, you sort of really slump down into all your joints and your bits and pieces. Whereas if we try and find that length and we try and find that positioning out nice and long between head to tail, there's a lot of activity around the deep hip. There is a lot of activity around that core, so to speak, or those deeper abdominal muscles and our deeper spinal muscles, which is all things that need to correlate straight into our leg and footwork. I just want you to take 5 breaths here. Just trying to find that activity, try and find that deep hip flexion that you almost did in your single leg lift. How does that actively correlate into this position? Good, and rest. Popping ourselves up. We will go to our side lift singles and our basic back extensions later on. I haven't missed them out of the fundamentals, but it's nice for us to revisit them closer to when we're using that for some of our lateral and extension work. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring ourselves up into our leg and footwork. So you're choosing a spring that would be of benefit to be able to give you feedback in your press, but also challenge your upright stability, but not too much where you feel like the pedal's pushing you around. You still want to be in control of it, and you still want to be able to get that feeling of that hip flexion, right? So I've chosen one top and a bottom, and that will be about right for me. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to start off finding the front edge of our sit bones or our ischials. Now, an easy way for us to find that, instead of starting at the top and trying to figure that out, I find that if you start with the pedal pressed down, you'll find a positioning where you can still have knees pretty much over the feet, and that you feel like your weight is on that front edge of the ischials itself. Then from there we can bring it up. And it's the same thing. We're looking for that deep knee flexion and that active hip flexion. So what is that? That's our single leg lifts. That's our active quadruped positioning, isn't it? And so all you're going to do is breathe out, press the pedal down, working through both front and back of legs, which essentially is part of the pelvic curl, working into our hip flexion, finding the length out through the trunk, which is our single leg lift. And then working through that lumbopelvic stability, which is a lot of that neutrality work that we work on in the foundations or the fundamental exercises at the start. It's our printed position. It's our quadruped. Good. We've done probably enough of the heels. We're going to go onto our toes. Find that spread of the toes again. So you've got those 2 points of pressure on the balls of your toes, but also the spread of the toes to have that active relationship. And from there again, we're pulling up and down from there. Continuing to visit that work of the fundamental repertoire. Two more on the toes. Then we're going to bring the heels together. And we're working into our V's. Same thing, as you work through those heels together, you're still finding the spread of the toes. And sometimes you can find it easier to find that pressure of the ball of the toes here because you're actively wrapping around part of the shape of the pedal, especially if you've got a rounded pedal like this. Continue to remember the correlation between things like your pelvic curl being the co-contraction, your single leg lift being your hip flexion, and your practice of that neutrality, which is your upright stability here, all coming into play for your leg and footwork. Good. As we go out wide to the heels. Finally finishing up on our toes. Last one. Bringing our feet back to a parallel position, we are going to go into our single leg work now. Now, once again, this is even more where our quadruped printing position comes out to. So being really active in that hip pull and even our single leg lift work too. We're going to bring one leg out in front of us, and don't overly get sort of worked up about the height. You know, I'm a bit of a stiff bod, so you know, I do struggle to keep it up. But as in, like, you can see when I do how my low back starts to really sort of roll under. And that's not quite the premise of the exercise. Yes, we want it up, but it's only as high up as you can actually maintain it and work at that deep hip centering. And so as we're working that leg up, are we working back into that deep hip flexion or that deep hip suction of the flexion like we do in single leg lift? And that's probably where we want to be able to take that view from. And so then from there, all we're doing is pressing on the breath out. Good, and then back up. Now I've cheekily kept my springs the same because hopefully you'll agree that I can somewhat maintain that. But you know, sometimes this is where we need to actually drop that spring down to maybe 2 bottom or even a top. And so I've got a spring tension that challenges me to stop me from rotating into it as it comes up and down, which is the work of our hulas and our spine twists to actually be able to control rotation or control not rotating. And so we still need a spring that's going to be able to change that. So if we're struggling with that, then lighten off the spring. If you haven't already, change sides for about 6 to 8 reps. Shake, shake, shake. Good, and rest. Fantastic. Moving on into our calf press. Once again, I'm going to keep it the same springs I did for my leg and footwork, okay? But at the same time, you know, if you need it a little bit lighter, you're welcome to do so, whether you drop it down to 2 bottom, but you still want feedback for the calf, and that's really important, right? So we're going to start off with balls of the toes on. We've got foot nice and flat onto the ground, and you're sort of looking at sort of like a foot and a femur's distance away is usually about the right foot and a femur's distance away from the pedal, which is usually the right distance to start with. And then if you were to lean into it and take your knee over the top, fingertips, you'll notice that my body line is pretty much lined up from head to heel on the standing leg. And then all we need to do from there is that we're going to breathe out we're going to try and not just press the pedal, but push the pedal away as we do so, and then work it back in. And so that push down and away just gets us to work up the chain of the foot into the calves a little bit more succinctly, as opposed to trying to push down at it. Good. We'll do about another 4 here. Good. And then bring ourselves up, standing up. I like to be able to stand back into the same position I am. And then being able to use even my transition into the next size as an exercise. So not just sort of stepping into it, but being able to balance, work out of my hip. Okay, knowing full well that we've got some side work to do later on. And then bringing myself into it from there. Don't forget, on the breath out of the press, try and push the pedal down and back towards you, not the chair itself. Just 3 more. Good. And then bring ourselves back out of that as well, finding my balance and coming up. Okay, so we're going to revisit the chest lift because the next exercise we're going to do is washerwoman. Okay. Meanwhile, we can change the spring. I'm going to turn it into just one top. Okay, so you are looking at probably one. You know, even for a heavier set or a stronger male, it might be 2 bottom. Okay, that's usually a spring tension I would use. But for the set purposes of what we're going to learn here, I'm just going to keep it at 1 top. Okay, so what you're going to do is you want to lay back down onto your back, and let's revisit that chest lift that we spoke about. So if we find that set up position, okay, and then brought our arms out and just revisited that whole connection of the arms to the torso. So as we breathe out, I want you to pull through those arms to find that feedback of the arm into the pull of the torso and also the flexion of the body as you work through, and then back down. And if you want to experiment and do it with floppy arms and see how you lose that connection, you might still be able to get up, but you lose that deep centering. The same thing happens when we go into our washerwomans. So we want to find that active reach, like your arm is a fulcrum to find that work into the center of your trunk, not there as a passive load or a leverage tool. Just one more. We don't need to do too many. Good. And so if we were to hop ourselves up from there, and then if I was to get us to stand, you know, once again, somewhat that thigh and foot distance length away from the chair would probably be about enough for you. And we're going to start at the top. Arms are going to roll we're going to roll ourselves down on the breath out until we find that pedal. And so we already notice that we're in flexion and our arms have had to be integrated to find the pedal. To actually find that full integration of the pedal, what happens if you were to pull at the pedal to find that arm connection into the ribs? That's it. Instead of pushing at it, you pull at it, and then how that gets you to sort of fold up and over the body itself, and then back down. So if we go again and we inhale, pull at the pedal, notice
how the more we pull at that pedal, it gets us to connect into our trunk flexion and also our abdominals. And then as we bring that back up. And look, if you're struggling to find the work on the inhale, swap it to an exhale. Use it so you can actually find even more active connection around those flexors. And back. And then from there,
rolling ourselves back up again. So hopefully you start to see how that active pull in the arms in your chest lift correlates to the active pull in the arms in the washerwoman to get us to work at our trunk flexors, to get that centralization, that connection back into the trunk, as opposed to it being very sort of hippy. And we're just moving at the hips to work at it. And especially for you bendy people out there, while you feel like you can't feel the work of the washerwoman. Good, so we're going to get back down again. So I told you it was going to be a little bit up and down. And we're going to revisit our pelvic curls. Now, we're going to keep the work, the spring at one top, most likely, for our washerwoman twos that we're going to, for our hamstring curl twos. If you feel like that's a little bit too much for you, just maybe put it down to the two bottom, give yourself a bit more support for it, but as long as you can move the pedal. In the meantime though, let's get ourselves to lay back down into the pelvic curl position, our setup position, okay? And I want you to refine your feet. Find that 3 points of pressure plus the spread of the toes to find that active work into the back of the feet or the underneath of the foot. Then what is your relationship with that pelvic length? Can we connect that length of the pelvis back into the back of the feet? And all of a sudden you should feel how that whole back point of the leg starts to fire up a little bit, which is essentially hamstring curl 2. As we breathe out, roll into your pelvic curl and keep working the thighs over the feet. Keep identifying that connection at the back of the foot all the way up the back of the legs to the back of the hip. So there's that pull mechanism, which when we get up to the top here, is essentially your hamstring curl 2. And then you just breathe out and roll back down. And as you roll back down, keep working of that posterior connection of the feet all the way out the back of the legs to the hips as we come through and down. We'll just do one more of these. Working on that back connection of the feet. Thighs are pulling over the feet. Keeping that posterior connection of the back sling from feet to back of legs to pelvis. Good. So then, if we were to put our feet on our pedal, whether you want to do it on the back of your heels or not is up to you. I do like a little bit more of the heel to the arch for particular reasons. I'm just going to push that out there. Yep. For the particular reason of that I want us to find that back connection just to make it more accessible to our work, right? So as we go up, before you go anywhere, have you found that connection to the back of the feet to the back of the pelvis? And that should start all the way here in our setup. Then as we imprint, yes, the connection changes, but it's only adapting to the different positioning of the spinal motion. I am still connecting all the way up through the back of the legs, just in different ways and different intensities, until I get up to the top. And then from there, it is a pull of the pedal, further solidifying that connection of the back chain
that we've spoken about. Good, once you've done about 3, I'll get you to roll back down. Nice, when you get down to the bottom, reedify that connection in the back sling of the legs, or the posterior sling, and we're back up again. Working those thighs over the pedal or the feet. So that if you get that, as you pull, you're continuing to stand through the hips and working those thighs over the feet. That way your relationship becomes a pull, as opposed to, and I'm going to do it now, a push, and then you sort of lose that pedal itself. Okay, rolling back down, we're going to do one more round. Once again, find that setup of the feet, rolling it back up. Good. And then standing as you keep finding that length out through the femurs over the feet as those feet come in underneath you. Reedifying that connection of foot to back of pelvis. And back down. Nice. Good. So putting your feet back down, we're going to bring you back again, just fully onto the mat. And I know this is sort of backtracking a little bit from where we've just been, but we are going to revisit the imprint, because this imprint I find is very important for us understanding our washerwoman twos. And why that is because when we get to our washerwoman 2 and it pulls us out long, that lumbopelvic connection and control as we're standing there is really important, because at some point we have to go from flexion, which is this part here of the imprint, that roll, back to more of a extension phase to find that length out through the washerwoman 2. So as in, when you're here, breathe out, find the roll of the pelvis, and remember what we spoke about, that as your spine adapts to the pelvic motion. And as you roll back into that sort of extension phase or back to neutral, notice how the spine adapts to that. And so that when we go into our washerwoman 2s in a second, when we ask you to find that reach out and long and that pelvis, you keep the weight back behind the pelvis, that is that reach back or that extension phase here. And so the spine has to adapt to it, which gives you that flattening or lengthening phase of the washerwoman 2, that is. Good. So let's get up. We're going to set ourselves up for our washerwoman 2s. We're going to keep it at one top spring if we can. Just going to bring my chair out into the middle a little bit more. Okay. And so as we're standing behind the chair here, right, what I want you to do is you're going to roll down and find the chair. Okay. So as we breathe out, we roll down, find our chair, and notice that our weight at the moment is probably somewhere in the middle towards the back. Okay. As we breathe in and we go down through the chair, as soon as that weight starts to pull us forward, that's when we actually start to undo the imprint of the pelvis, which pushes our thoracic forward into the chair for that long version of the washerwoman. And as we breathe out, using that imprint of the pelvis again, to actually find our trunk flexion to pull us back up. So we breathe in, wait for that feeling of the shift forward of the body, then start to undo the pelvis and let the spine adapt to that. Last one. And then all the way back up. So hopefully you're starting to see a little bit of how the fundamentals really do come in and really sort of branch out into all the other repertoire in some way or form. It's just a similar motion or a similar principle or control, just done up with more complexity of movement or load or range. But still the control work is there, back down from the fundamentals. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on, okay, back down to our mat. Okay, so we're up and down again. This is the last time we'll sort of be up and down again, okay, into what is our lateral part of our fundamentals. So if we were to set ourselves up onto our sides, okay, and I want you to, you can use this as a way to, somewhat line the back of your body up with the back of your mat if you feel like that is how you would like to work it, okay? And we're just going to find what is somewhat of a neutral positioning, laying sideways. So yes, you're talking about the underneath waistline being, having some engagement so you're not slumping down into it. But essentially you want to think about your hips being stacked, ribs stacked, shoulders stacked. And then neutral is also, or that feeling of that setup, is that we still have curvature in our spine. It shouldn't be flat and it shouldn't be overarched. So do we actually have that shape there? What does it take to control that, even just laying here? So printing this position, what does it actually take in our bodies to keep that? Because then when we move from it, that position, which is really important we do, our body's got to understand how to adjust, whether it's intensity or to a point of having to change our shape altogether. Good. So what we're going to do from here is we're going to come up into our single side lift. So as you breathe out and you lift your leg, you bring it up as far as you sort of can, just above hip height, without losing any of that work that we just spoke about in the trunk. So what does it take to keep us here? And as we lift that leg, whatever that took to keep us there when we're laying down with 2 feet down, is usually just intensifying as we add the complexity of the leg movement. And so what you'll start to feel is that musculature around the trunk working, but also obviously the mover of being the abduction of the hip. But there's more to it. You'll feel a lot of anti-rotational work. What stops you from rolling onto your side as you lift? There's a lot of obliques there. There's a lot of trunk stability and pelvic stability. Just 2 more. Good, last one. Nice, then we'll go on to the other side. Which might be a better side, I've got a bit more room, right? Okay. All right, so, yep, you can line yourself up with the back of the mat if you find that is easier. Bring your legs slightly in front of you, okay? And then from there, find that neutrality again. So yes, there's a little bit of work underneath here. We've got to find that shape of the spine that we look for, that length from head to tail, really. And then just stay here for a second and breathe into it to feel what it actually takes to keep you stacked like that, to keep you in that shape. Because then as you start to work the leg to come up, as you breathe out, That work should just intensify. Good, we're just going to do one more. Nice. So from here, we are going to move ourselves onto our stomach for a second, so we can work into our basic back extensions. Now, we're going to bring that head down, and forehead's going to be on the ground. Legs are out nice and long. I like to bring my legs slightly apart because it's just better for my pelvis, okay? But we definitely want some energy out through them. We don't sort of want them just flat and slumped over. From here, the arms are going to roll back as we breathe in. And we roll the nose forward as we swing that breastbone forward, as the arms continue to pull back and open up to find space for our body to extend through, and then back down. And as we breathe in again, find that roll forward. Find that peel forward of the breastbone as the arms come back, and then back down. And remember, the arms are active to find space and to create space for you to be able to extend through, as opposed to being passive or even passive and down, and you can't find your extension. Now, the workout through the legs is really important because that gives you this base and this anchor to be able to work the body out of, as opposed to if it's passive, and then you have no control on where you're actually focusing your movement because you've just got a lot of passiveness everywhere else. So you'll tend to extend and move where you can. So like the lumbar and, sort of pulling your pelvis into more of a tilt and stuff. So we use that way to be able to actually focus this work into our thoracic extension. And then down. Good, just bring yourself into a rest position after that. Just so we can open up through the back for a second before we go into our side reach and our basic swan work. Couple of breaths here. So we're going to leave our chair on a top spring, okay? If you find that's too much, drop it down a little bit. If you find it's a little bit light for your feedback, go to two bottom. But you sort of want to sit around this sort of realm of mainly one spring, potentially two. We're going to set ourselves up. Now, as we set ourselves up, I don't want you to sit up onto your pelvis for your side reach. I want you to sit into the side corner. So if we have a look at this position here, if we were to take this image from my head to my foot there, it's a coronal plane load. We're loading up through the side of my body that I don't drop down into it. So this is where using that work from our side-lying single side lift work is really important, because what does it actually take for me to get here to stay like this? It's very similar to the work musculature that I worked down on my side lift single work. So then if I put the hand here, and as we breathe in to extend up and over into our side reach, my body then has to work out how to keep a lot of this stability before I
rotate my pelvis or rotate it back. So once again, there's a lot of derotational work that happens out of our hulas and our spine twists, but also laying on our side into our side lift single. So it's not just about the motion, which we tend to get caught up on. We will get more out of the motion if we can find those principles that we worked with from the fundamentals into the setup of the exercise. Just one more. Good. We'll go the other side. Once again, sitting up onto the corner of that buttocks, finding that long position, so that setup just sort of similar to the side lift singles. Arm is down. What does it take to keep all this area nice and in position for our base, for us to move around? Does it have to adapt to our motion? And also another thing is if you start going over and your foot starts to slide or it starts to lift off, you're not actually increasing your range. You're literally just taking that shape and moving it. So there's no actual extra range of motion. You're just creating extra moving of the same end range. So it's really important that we do find that stability, because that's how we actually get to increase our range, is by working out of it and from it, not taking that shape and just flipping it or moving it. That was your last one. And up. So now if we were to look at our basic swan, okay, and we go back and remember our basic back extension, right? Same things apply. We're going to come back down, and yes, hands are over the pedals, okay? Legs are out nice and long, but we need that energy out through this, because that is our base. That is our base to move around and from. So that energy out of the legs is there. Just like the relationship of the arms with the basic back extension, the arms are important here for your basic swan. So what I want you to focus on is the pull back of the pedal to find that change of the shoulder to create space for us to extend from. So as we breathe in, the arms will pull back to create that space for us to extend from, and then back. As opposed to trying to lift the pedal, and then a lot of it's in the lumbar and you see the legs to dip. So the energy out of the legs. Arms move and engage to create space for the trunk and for the thoracic to extend from. And back down. Just give me 3 more like this. Lucky last. Good. And then I'll just get you to put one hand back onto the pedal to push yourself back up. I'm going to move my chair out of the way. And just for our little bit of OH&S out of that, and also our cool down, we're just going to work into some cat stretches. And so seeing, after doing that work around our washerwoman's and our side reach and our basic swan there, when we go into our cat stretch, can we actually find the full spine from the base of the cranium all the way down to the tail,
and being able to get that control into its motion. And even if you feel like you might not be able to control it yet, but you can feel it, we have done our job for the day, which is being able to create an understanding into our body, creating or building proprioception where it may be needed, and even building control where it may be needed, which is stability, which is motion, which is a lot of what we teach in Pilates. Good. So I hope you enjoyed today's class on Intro to Basic Wunda Chair Repertoire and how the fundamentals of our fundamental exercises in mat work and how we start teaching a lot of our sessions integrates back into actually the rest of the repertoire. And that it's, even though it's a different exercise, there are still the principles present, there are still motions present, because they are all, we can only do a certain amount of motions in our body. It's just, you know, the differences is complexity, load, positioning, and also combinations. So combinations of motion that makes it look completely different, which gets back to complexity. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you got a bit out of it on understanding why getting our head around the basics and understanding the basics really helps with the rest of our practice, more than what we realize.